You are listening to Eat Meat Sparingly, a word of wisdom podcast. I am your host, Ali Essig. This episode is sponsored by the Holistic Holiday at Sea. The Holistic Holiday at Sea is a vegan cruise where it's like a combination of a magical Caribbean cruise with all the delicious vegan food. And on top of that, it's like a medical conference on the boat. And if you're a nerd like me, you probably absolutely love to hear from these well-renowned doctors like Dr. Bernard and Dr. Michael Greger and so many more. There's over 40 teachers and 35 classes that are available on this cruise. So when the days that you're at sea, you get to learn and really get to know these doctors and mentors at a deeper level. And then you get to go and explore these beautiful locations. While you're on the cruise, there's amazing, delicious vegan food. And when I went this last year, I was talking to my friend when we shared a room, and I'm like, I feel like we're all just operating at a higher vibration. When you're completely 100% plant-based, you just feel so good. I felt so good. Like rarely do you ever get to feel amazing on a vegan cruise. So make sure you check out the link below. And if you mention PlantWise when you're booking, you get an additional $50 credit that you can use in the bookstore while you're there. So not only mention PlantWise, but take advantage. Get that $50, get your free books. Enjoy. It is the most amazing experience. And it leaves March 1st through the 8th in 2026. So take advantage. Today's episode is all about eggs. We're going to talk about eggs. This is probably one of the biggest questions I get asked all the time. And so if you're a nerd like me, let's go deep into the science and really try to understand it. When I first went plant-based, I kind of drank the Kool-Aid of like, everything plant-based is amazing and everything that's not is terrible. And then I realized that that's not always true. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where when you're new to learning these things, you think that you're right and everyone else is wrong. But the more you learn, the more you understand, the more you realize that honestly, life is not like that. It is not black and white. It is not clear, good or bad. Life is golden. It is sparkly. It is magical. And that is the case with eggs. Eggs really are a perfect protein, right? Or at least that's what everyone is teaching us. So the question is it actually good for your heart? Is it good for your blood sugar levels? Is it good for the planet? Today, I'm going to unpack all of it, the nutrition, the hormones, the cancer, diabetes, heart disease data, and something really interesting about hyper-responders and who they are, how many people are hyper-responders, and if you should be eating eggs if you are a hyper-responder, who should avoid eggs, and who should take advantage of this perfect protein. Well, what is in an egg? Why do so many people claim that it is an amazing source of protein, something that we should all start our day off of? Well, it's about 72 calories per egg and 6.3 grams of protein, 4.8 grams of fat, and about 186 milligrams cholesterol. Now, this is why a lot of people claim that eggs are amazing because it has some pretty standout micronutrients. Number one is choline, and most adults underconsume choline, okay? And eggs are one of the top sources. And this is vital for brain and cell membranes, for memory and attention, and for liver fat metabolism. Eggs are also a great source of vitamin D. They're one of the very few natural food sources. By the way, mushrooms are also a great source, especially if you leave your mushrooms out in the sun. It can absorb more vitamin D, even if you just leave them out in the sun for 10 minutes before you eat them. Gil side up. But I digress. Let's go back to eggs. Eggs are also a great source of B12 and of riboflavin, folate, and biotin. B2 and B7. So B12, B2, and B7. Now, these are meaningful amounts. Like biotin is primarily in the yolk, and even raw whites contain some other nutrients which can bind biotin. So cooking it inactivates it. So it's just some little details. But in general, it has a lot of great nutrients from B12, B2, and B7. Lutein and zeaxanthin. These are great for eye health, for the carotenoids, and higher bioavailability is from the egg yolk versus spinach or even supplements. So the yolk enrichment trials raise serum levels and macular pigment. So basically, it's way better to get those nutrients from eggs than it is from supplements. Bottom line, eggs are nutrient dense, especially for choline and the yolk carotenoids. Now, through the nutrient payload, we want to understand, is this nutrient payload, does it override the risks? And what are the risks? The yolk is also high in cholesterol and even some saturated fat. Now, a lot of people argue that the benefits outweigh the risks because a lot of us need this cholesterol for our hormones. But is that true? You'll see this all the time. Women should be eating eggs. It's so good for perimenopause or menopause because of your hormones. So if hormones need cholesterol, do we need to eat cholesterol? Well, your body makes cholesterol primarily in the liver and in the intestine. And honestly, we do not need to eat cholesterol. It's amazing. You have this internal production system that adjusts. So when you do eat cholesterol, then less will be produced. So if you're eating more, less is produced for most people. If you're eating less, then more is produced. And your body really wants to reach this homeostasis. Now, new research is mapping out this control loop, how it really works. And are there certain people that really do need to eat cholesterol in order to supply these hormones? And the classic answer is no. Cholesterol is essential for hormones and cell membranes, but your body manufactures plenty. There is no dietary requirement to eat cholesterol for hormone production. So let's nip that in the bud. Whenever anyone says to eat eggs for hormones, it's not necessary. It's definitely not necessary at all. Now, what about eggs and cardiovascular disease? Now, eggs had this 200 milligrams of cholesterol each around there, right? Could be a little bit less, a little bit more depending on the egg. And the classic mechanism that is found to increase cholesterol levels is not actually directly related to how much cholesterol you eat. Okay. So that's really important to understand that cholesterol you're eating does not directly increase your LDL cholesterol. In fact, saturated fat and trans fat is going to increase your LDL cholesterol way more than eating cholesterol. I know it's confusing, and it took me a lot of time to really understand that principle. Saturated fat matters more, right? Now, eggs do have a decent amount of saturated fat, and it all depends on how many eggs you're eating and how much saturated fat, and maybe it's that can increase your cholesterol. But in general, if you were to rank it in order, the worst thing for your cholesterol levels is trans fat. That's the worst. We want to avoid that as much as possible. And there is even a trans fat ban in the United States that limits how many foods can have trans fat in them and how much. Now, the more processed foods, fast foods you're eating, the more foods that are sitting on a shelf for a really long time, like those baked goods, like cake that's been there for a long time, for a couple of weeks and still tastes good, like that's going to have trace amounts of these trans fats. We definitely want to avoid those foods. Fast food as well. When you're frying foods, all those things, they have trans fats. So that's the biggest risk for increasing your LDL cholesterol. Next to that is going to be saturated fat. Now, saturated fat is way more common in our diet these days than trans fat. Now, that didn't used to be the case when margarine kind of first came out, or other processed foods came out. They were higher in trans fats, but now there's the ban, so we don't need to stress about it. It's saturated fat that we do need to be more aware of. When we consume more saturated fat, that can increase your LDL cholesterol. Okay. Then below that is going to be eating cholesterol. Now, it's interesting because we know for cardiovascular risk that the higher your LDL cholesterol, the higher the risk. So what happens when you eat, let's say, an egg a day? And the research is showing that one egg a day, it's pretty neutral. It keeps the saturated fat low. It's not super high, right? You're not eating too much of that cholesterol. And so most studies found when you're eating about one egg a day, there's no association between egg intake and cardiovascular disease. Okay, so that's really important to understand. There are some studies that have found that higher dietary cholesterol or egg intake is linked to higher cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality. So that in truth, it's a dose-response relationship. How many people are actually eating one egg a day? Most people, when they sit down for breakfast, are not like, I'll have one, please. They usually have 2 to 4. And so the higher the egg consumption, the higher the risk is what they have found. Now, could this be because when you are eating eggs, you're also eating more processed meats? You're also eating more cheese. How many people are just eating eggs with vegetables? A lot of people will put eggs and cheese. And so could this be because of what else you're eating with the eggs? Now, the American Heart Association has said that for most healthy people, one egg a day with a diet that is already low in saturated fat is not clearly associated with cardiovascular risk. And again, it may all depend on the dietary context. What are you eating with your eggs? Is it eggs with vegetables or eggs with bacon and butter? or cheese. And people with existing cardiovascular disease or high LDL or even diabetes should be more conservative and focus on low saturated fat patterns. So going back to what matters more than eating cholesterol, eating saturated fat. So that really is going to be the bigger domino that we need to knock over. Eggs and type 2 diabetes. In a meta-analysis in 2020, there was no overall association between moderate egg intake and the incidence of type 2 diabetes. Now, again, moderate. What does that mean? 3 eggs a week or less. That's moderate. That's like having eggs once a week, really. And so it's good to know. As far as type 2 diabetes, now, if you're eating eggs every day, that's going to be considered a high intake, and that is associated with an increased risk. So again, it all depends on what else you're eating, how often you're eating it, and are you following an overall low saturated fat meal pattern? Because that matters more than cholesterol. What about cancer, though? There was a mortality meta-analysis that showed that each additional egg a day was associated with a 7% increase of all-cause mortality and a 13% cancer mortality. Now, isn't that fascinating that it does say that the more consumption of eggs, the more increase in cancer? Slight, but there is an increased risk in cancer. Now, other studies have shown no association at all between egg intake and breast cancer, and other cancers sometimes are neutral or uncertain. Now, the cancer data is a little inconsistent, but if there's risk, it likely relates to overall dietary patterns. When you're eating eggs, what else are you eating them with? Again, if you're eating eggs with processed meat, which is a known carcinogen, like bacon, like ham, then you're going to increase your risk of cancer. That's it. Also, if you're eating eggs, you're not getting a lot of fiber. And if we're not eating the vegetables with the eggs, then you're not getting the fiber that's going to reduce your risk. And so it's really more important than the eggs per se, than the eggs themselves. Now, there's always the exception to the rule. And who is the exception to this egg rule? Basically, there's not a huge risk as long as you're not eating butter and cheese and processed meats with the eggs. As long as you're not eating more than 1 egg a day, that's where the neutral risk appears, unless you increase any of those factors, unless you are a hyper responder. Now, as I explained before, when you consume eggs for normal people, or you consume any type of dietary cholesterol, your liver will adjust. So it wants to reach that equilibrium, right? So it will make less cholesterol in your body, and if you're consuming more. Now, if you are a hyper responder, that system doesn't work. Your liver is not adjusting. So when you consume higher dietary cholesterol, guess what happens? Your body doesn't adjust. And higher dietary cholesterol is a risk factor. It's not as big as trans fat or saturated fat, but it is a risk factor. So as you're consuming more dietary cholesterol and your liver is not adjusting because you're a hyper responder and you're responding to this and your liver isn't responding, it's still going down and up and it's still producing the same amount, then your cholesterol increases. And that's a known risk factor for increasing your LDL cholesterol. So how many people, this is, I think, the most important statistic to understand and know. How many people are hyper responders, and how do you know if you're a hyper responder? This is fascinating. It is estimated in modern trials that a third of us are hyper responders. That's a lot. So when people ask me, should I eat eggs? And I always say, well, it depends. It depends. If you are not taking a vitamin B12 supplement, it may be beneficial that you have an egg to give that B12, right? We want to make sure we're getting B12. It may be beneficial for your kids if they're not taking B12. And kids usually don't have high cholesterol, and so they usually have a lower risk when it comes to eggs. But for adults, if you already have high cholesterol, you most likely are probably 1/3 of people, they're hyper responders. So if you stop eating eggs, most likely your body will respond. Right? If you're eating eggs regularly and then you stop, I betcha that your cholesterol is going to go down. Because a third of us are those hyper responders that when you're consuming cholesterol, your body is not adjusting. And so it will increase your risk of cardiovascular disease, among many other things. Okay. So it all depends on where your cholesterol levels are right now. If they're high, I would say avoid eggs. Cut them out. Just cut them out. If you're a kid, don't stress about it, right? Who else should be avoiding or limiting eggs? Those with genetic disorders, a common genetic disorder, which is familial hypercholesterolemia. Those are people who are about 1 in 250 people who just will genetically have higher cholesterol. So you should not be consuming eggs. I think it's interesting because I actually listened to a really famous podcast right before this about eggs. And you know what he said at the very beginning? He said, I'm going to tell you all about eggs and why you should be eating more eggs. But at the very beginning, if you are a hyper responder or if you have familiar hypercholesterolemia, you should not listen to this advice. And the sad thing is, that's like a third of the population. That's a lot of people. And you don't even know, most people don't even know. Now, this genetic issues are not as high as 1 in 250, but those with hyper responders, like it's a lot. So most people, not most, I would say a good amount, a third of the people really should be avoiding eggs. Now, if you already have established cardiovascular disease, if you already have type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance, the evidence is mixed and it's best to be cautious in practice and at least to limit the egg yolks, right? So at least if you really want to eat eggs, okay, eat the egg whites. If you already have cardiovascular disease, if you already have type 2 diabetes, and if you already have insulin resistance, as you know, saturated fat can really affect those. And so just cutting out the egg yolks will help. And some people in pregnancy as well, it's something, I don't know, there's the benefits of the choline, but it just kind of depends. If you are needing to, I don't know, watch out for an egg allergy, that should be another place where you would want to avoid eggs, clearly. So what are some practical ways to replace eggs if you are one of those people? Here's the thing that I wish more people knew. Tofu scramble has more protein than an egg scramble. Tofu has more protein than eggs, and it has zero saturated fat or very minimal saturated fat and no cholesterol. I would say swap it out with tofu scramble. You honestly won't even know it. But you could do chickpea flour omelets. You could do like a soy yogurt parfait. You could do a bean and vegetable breakfast. I just really think that there's so many other breakfasts that you can have that the thought of having to have a savory breakfast with eggs isn't a necessity. But if anything, at least cut out the butter and the cheese, okay? Cut out the butter, the cheese, the processed meats. So that's step 1, add in some veggies instead. And then after that, let's go to step 2 and possibly cut out those eggs. Now, what's fascinating about eggs that I want to say too is that when you consume eggs, if you are a meat eater, so if you're someone who's already consuming animal products on a daily basis and you're eating eggs, it can produce what's called TMAO in your gut. TMAO increases your risk of heart disease and stroke. But here's the fascinating thing about eggs. If you are a vegetarian, if you are not already eating meat, if you eat meat sparingly or don't eat meat at all, when you consume eggs, your gut does not produce TMAO. It doesn't. So you have a much lower risk. If you're eating eggs, it's not going to increase your risk of stroke and heart disease at the same level that it would to someone who is already eating meat. I think that's fascinating. It's so interesting. Another reason why eggs are so nuanced. Now, there's a clear takeaway when it comes to all of this. Like, should you eat eggs? Should you not? I don't know. Does ethics matter to you? Because the modern egg supply really involves hundreds of millions of male chicks culled in the US yearly and ongoing welfare concerns. And while cage-free is growing, it's not universal and it's not really the solution. So let's talk about the male chick culling industry. So in the US, there's anywhere between 300 to 350 male chicks that are killed. Culling is another word to say killed. They're killed, done. They're killed annually. And the reason why is because when these eggs are hatched, if they're a male, males don't lay eggs. And so it's not profitable to raise. And so they're instantly like incarcerated or there's this maceration. They basically are put on this belt that then drops them into a machine that just grinds them up is the best way to say it. Or they're gassed. Those are kind of the two methods of how all these male chicks are killed immediately. Oh, you're born, you're male, you're dead. And globally, 7 billion male chicks are killed a year. 7 billion. Now, what happens to that? Sometimes it's fed to, like, it's turned into dog food or cat food or other things like that. I know it can be, but sometimes it's just complete waste. It just depends on the industry. Now, there's emerging technology where these hatcheries are piloting machines that would identify the male embryos before hatching to avoid this live chick culling. And currently it's very limited. And so it is growing slowly. But right now, these conditions are they're terrible. But even for those chicks who are female and who are going to they live terrible, horrible lives, right? Now, there's this rapid shift towards cage free. So most egg laying hens are put in what's called a battery cage where they don't even have enough space. It's like literally the size of a piece of paper, and they don't have enough space to raise their wings. Like literally, they cannot even raise their wings, which is so sad. They cannot fulfill the measure of their creation. Why would you have wings if you could never raise them ever? And so with that, there has been this push towards a little bit more friendly, like cage-free area, but that does not mean pasture raised, right? It just removes these battery cages, but they can still be in very crowded indoor situations. Now, why does this matter? Ethically sourced eggs, like your neighbor raising their eggs in their backyard, it's going to be a much better source. You're not contributing to this factory farming in this terrible industry, and it can reduce suffering in this world. And if we can make that choice, why not? Right now, even cage-free still doesn't eliminate the male chick issues that are everywhere unless that technology and really just preventing them from being born in the first place gets more widespread. So what are the takeaways? First of all, nutritionally, eggs deliver high quality protein. No question. They have tons of nutrients like choline, lutein, zeaxanthin, and they're really one of few foods with vitamin D. Now, when it comes to your cholesterol and your hormones, you don't need to eat cholesterol for hormones. Your body makes it and it auto adjusts for most people, unless you're a hyperresponder. Unless you're a hyperresponder, then again, your body still makes plenty of hormones, but you aren't auto-adjusting and you could just be increasing your cholesterol. When it comes to disease risk, the most important markers are going to be trans fat and then saturated fat and then cholesterol. And most studies show a neutral cardiovascular risk for around of 1 egg a day. But there is mixed findings overall. And the more increase in egg consumption, the risk generally does increase, especially for things like cancer. Could it be because of what you're eating with your eggs? We don't know. That's the thing. We don't know if it's because the more eggs people tend to eat, the more bacon they're eating, the more butter, the more cheese. And so if you have high cholesterol, you could be the 1/3 of hyperresponders, and it may be best for you to avoid eggs. And if you have any other type of issue like diabetes or heart disease already, or any egg allergy, right? Though people with elevated lipids, if you have insulin resistance, I would suggest avoiding eggs. And if you're worried about your risk of cancer, because while we aren't sure if it's the eggs or what you're eating with the eggs, there is that response that the more eggs you're eating, it can increase your risk of cancer. Now, most of these studies are shown on a dose response relationship. So if it's just a little bit at a time, it's not going to be that big of a risk or that big of a deal. Now, most of the nutrition of the egg is found in the yolk. And so when you are not eating the yolk, you're not getting all of the benefits of the nutrition. But if you are like some of my clients who are allergic to soy, right? And they're on a plant-based diet and they're just struggling getting enough protein, the egg whites may be something that you can do, right? You don't already have high cholesterol. You're not worried about it. And even then, the cholesterol, most of it is found in the yolk. So it's so nuanced. It's not black and white. Yeah, it really isn't. I wish it was. I wish I could say, do this. No, it depends on you. It depends on what do I do personally. Currently, there are eggs in our fridge. We have an au pair that lives with us and she eats eggs. And so we have them. I don't love it. I try to buy cage-free. And sometimes if she's cooking eggs, my kids will ask for eggs and I'm fine if they eat them. I very rarely personally eat eggs. Like I just don't. I don't crave them. I don't think about it. It's very rare. And I even try to avoid eggs in baking and all of those things. I'll use like a flax egg or beans. Because when you mix up beans with water, you can actually take out the eggs and the oil in a lot of recipes like brownies. Now, for you, what should you do? I don't know. It depends. If you're pregnant, make sure that you're eating fully cooked eggs. That's really important and minimize any type of risk as far as salmonella, all of those things. And, if you have high cholesterol, but if you don't, like I have a really good friend, she is plant-based. Sometimes she'll eat some fish and she hates taking her vitamins. And so for someone like her, she's thin, she's naturally thin. She does not have high cholesterol and she's already pretty much vegetarian. And so I'm like, yeah, you should probably eat eggs because it's better that you would get B12 than not getting B12 at all. And so again, it's up to you. It's up to you what you feel like your general risk is for these situations and what's the best thing for you to do to move forward. And if you are one who's getting eggs, I would definitely suggest pasture raised, cage free, grow them in your backyard, do what you got to do to minimize suffering in this world. I think it's always a good idea. All right. Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to leave any comments below. Did I miss anything? Is there anything else that I didn't go over or discuss? I would love to hear it. So let me know. Otherwise, I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to Eat Meat Sparingly, a Word of Wisdom podcast. I'm your host, Ali Essig. And if you need more help and support with transitioning to eating more plants so you can lose weight and improve your gut health and just reduce your risk of chronic disease, then make sure to check out my PlantWise membership. That's PlantWhys, because I like to teach the why behind eating more plants. But if all you need is just a couple more delicious recipes that feed your family and everyone loves, and not to mention super simple and easy, then make sure to check out my YouTube channel, which is also PlantWise, PlantWhys. Hope to see you there.